Good morning, I'm Julian Reed and welcome to Today in Parliament.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Janae Noel Ferguson. Welcome to another show. Thanks so much for joining us again today. While Today in Parliament focuses on present legislation and a look back at recent debates.
Yesterday, when the House last met, parliamentarians concluded debate on the Immigration Amendment Bill 2015.
That's right, and that bill has now moved on to the committee stage in the House, and once passed, will make provisions for those not covered by the Constitution to apply for a belonger's permit.
Yes, the Immigration Amendment Bill will also allow for a new detention center and the provision of immigration reserves, like the police reserves.
Yes.
But later we'll take a look at some of the highlights of that debate. Today, however, parliamentarians will begin debate on the Bahamas Cooperative Credit Union Bill.
Yes, and we looked at that bill a few weeks back, but that bill is a part of a compendium of bills that will be tabled and debated. The other bills include the Central Bank Amendment Bill, the Business License Amendment Bill number 2, the Cooperative Societies Amendment Bill, the Financial Transactions Reporting Amendment Bill number 3, and the Bahamas Institute of Chartered Accountants Bill. Most of the focus today, though, is expected to be on the Credit Union Bill.
Yes, absolutely. And this bill, Janea, seeks to provide for the registration, continuance, supervision, and management of credit unions by the central bank. And as we hear in this report, the objectives and reasons for the bill.
Yeah, well, I'll just go through some of those objectives and reasons. This actually is intended to bring credit unions nationwide under the framework of the central bank, having regard for 3 factors. So they're looking at the growth of the sector and the importance for the implications of financial stability. We know that credit unions take in huge amounts of money, so they want to ensure that in the event that something happens, they have that additional safeguard under the central bank. It is also looking to bring this legislation into force because we want to be seen by international agencies as taking the right measures to secure financial institutions.
Absolutely. With anything to do with financial institutions, we have to take those safeguards.
Right, that's right. And the third reason is the desire for greater consolidation in the domestic financial regulatory space. So those are the 3 things that brought this bill into being, and some of the things that this bill is intended to do. It will supervise credit unions. It's also intended to maintain a register of credit unions so we know who's involved, who's making these transactions. It also includes, the central bank will have to include the credit unions now in their annual report. So they will also act, I'm thinking, as an auditor for the credit unions now. And it also specifies the grounds on which the central bank may suspend or cancel a registration of a credit union. So they're like the watchdogs now of the credit union. It exempts cooperatives with assets less than $1 million from some of the reporting conditions. So the smaller entities may not have to fulfill some of the regulations that the bigger credit unions might have to fulfill. This bill also sets out the qualifications for membership. It places a limit on the number of shares held by members, which I found interesting. And it also provides the transfer of equity shares to be subject to certain conditions. Additionally, it also deals with loans. We know that persons utilize credit unions. They might want to mortgage a home, take out a car loan, that sort of thing. So now the central bank being involved, they will look at loan limits and loan security. There's also a number of other clauses that this bill will entail, but as you know, there are 7 credit unions currently operating in the Bahamas.
Well, the fact is, too, now that their bank charges are so high, and the credit unions give better interest rates.
That is absolutely correct.
Yeah. Well, credit unions come under the Minister of Agriculture and Marine Resources, V. Alfred Gray, and are governed under the Cooperative Societies Act. The assets of credit unions have increased greatly over the years, for some of the reasons we just said, as more people are investing their funds in credit unions.
That's right, and according to the central bank, at the end of December 2010, credit unions had amassed some $250 million, with membership now at 3,800 persons. Those figures, of course, have increased from 2010, and given some of the changes in the economy, we see those numbers going up.
Absolutely correct. You know, the sector's increase in funds, along with the government's desire to rationalize the financial regulatory landscape, have influenced the decision to bring credit unions within the regulatory framework of the central bank, which we had indicated earlier.
Right. And as we researched this bill, Julian, we learned that to assist in this transition, the government secured technical assistance from the Commonwealth Secretariat under a two-year project That took place from 2010 to 2013.
A comprehensive assessment of individual credit unions and the League was taken with the objective to ensure that credit unions are managed to international standards.
And Julian, we also spoke with the CEO of the National Workers Credit Union, Mr. Alfred Poitier, who also discussed the significance of this bill, and we have a clip with him here. Well, Janae, Julian, as Mr. Poitier explained, this bill adds another layer of protection to investments that one would have to make should they utilize a credit union.
Being regulated by a central bank. I think the same strict policies and procedures that we have had to undergo under the Department of Cooperatives will be carried over. Credit unions are governed in the Bahamas by a group of, well, not a group, but ratios, Pearl ratios, or Pearl standards, which is a group of about 36 ratios which test the liquidity of an organization. And it also gives us some indication of our weak areas and the areas that need to be addressed. They give you certain levels that you're supposed to be in these specific categories, and if you're not, then you have to pull up your socks in those areas. When an inspection is done by a central bank or whatever the regulatory body is, these are the same items that they will be looking for. So it really won't bring anything new other than, I guess, the aesthetics, which is no longer the Department of Cooperatives. It's now the central bank. Credit unions and banks are two different entities, yet still they come under the same umbrella in terms of credit unions are financial institutions, and so are banks. Banks are profit-driven. The bottom line is, hey, let's make some profit for our board of directors. Credit unions, on the other hand, are financial institutions that are member and service-driven. It's about providing the service to our membership. Don't get me wrong, credit unions have to make a profit to remain open. There's no question about it. But the profit stream in credit unions, or the profit level in credit unions, is significantly lower than banks, simply because, yes, we have to remain viable, we have to stay open, but we put our efforts and our resources back into the people that utilize our services.
Okay, and you said credit unions are driven by its members. Give us a bird's eye view of how much are credit unions utilized in the country.
Unfortunately, credit unions in the Bahamas are not utilized as much as our counterparts throughout the Caribbean, even North and South America. We have less than 10% penetration into the market. However, though, credit unions have seen a significant growth over the last few years, year or two.
Why is that?
I think people are realizing that credit unions are viable alternates for financial services. And I think credit unions are becoming more aggressive in promoting their services and products. And, at one point, credit unions was considered an institution for the older folks. And I think a lot of that has to do by the way we have presented ourselves. But you have credit unions such as National Workers who, giving you debit cards, online banking, web banking, the whole 9 yards. So we're now attracting the younger folks, and they're realizing that, hey, you know what, I actually have a say in how my money is managed. I have a say in the products and services that can be offered or being offered by this financial institution. So we're considering ourselves to be blessed. Yeah, well, there are a whole lot of issues, and I can speculate all day. But, internationally speaking, there's always concern about terrorist financing and all this other stuff. So, that could play a part of it, but I couldn't officially tell you, that's what it is.
Better safe than sorry, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And this is definitely to safeguard, you would say.
Well,
yes, we know we have the procedures that are already in place.
Yeah,
but
we have the procedures, and credit unions have been quite strict in terms of money laundering, and we pretty much apply by the rules, or apply the rules. So really, in our movement, I don't see that as being an issue. But the powers that be feels that we should go under central bank. There has been dialogue, I know for sure. There's been dialogue for quite some time about this. So hopefully it's a smooth transition. And my understanding in the meetings that I happened or was fortunate to sit in on central bank understands that there is a difference between credit unions and banks. So, it's not where the credit union will be automatically looked at the same manner in which banks are looked at, because the purpose, again, in the operation of the organizations are different.
Well, Janea, as Mr. Poitier explains, the bill adds another layer of protection to investments that one would make with a credit union. Mr. Poitier also indicated credit union members have more in their savings accounts than other account holders.
That's right, and as you will hear in this next clip, Mr. Poitier discussed that regularizing credit unions is not only taking place here at home, but also on a global level.
It's an internationally accepted, internationally practiced standard for credit unions worldwide. So in terms of teeth, I think what it does is it may provide a better level of comfort for some individuals. Some people who may not have looked at credit unions before will say, okay, well, now they're in the central bank, maybe we should take them seriously. But the reality of it is over the years, credit unions have been, I think the first registered credit union in the Bahamas was in 1976. So you're looking at about 40 plus years. And starting out from really small, humble beginnings, a few people coming together and starting to pool their resources, credit unions now have in excess of $250 million in assets in this country. So I think we can't be deceived or, sleep and think that the numbers don't matter. We know the numbers matter, and our growth is probably one of the reasons why the government is moving towards having us regulated under central bank. But it's not unique to the Bahamas. Throughout the Caribbean, there's been a move to have credit unions move to the central bank as well. And focus customer-based, member-based, right? So even though we would require the same stringent requirements, the manner in which we go about it, the manner in which you are asked to provide it, and the delivery of service, again, we are member-based. So we have to show that to our members. Mm-hmm. Some credit unions don't do mortgages. Others do. For those that don't do mortgages, there are other services that we offer in helping you prepare to get your mortgage. So at the end of the day, it's almost a seamless process, but, that's what we do. We provide service.
And with the introduction of the central bank now through this legislation, this just means added teeth or more support?
I think the Pearl standards remains. It's an internationally accepted, internationally practiced standard for credit unions worldwide. So in terms of teeth, I think what it does is it may provide a better level of comfort for some individuals. Some people who may not have looked at credit unions before will say, okay, well, now they're in the central bank, maybe we should take them seriously. But the reality of it is over the years, credit unions have been, I think the first registered credit union in the Bahamas was in 1976. So you're looking at about 40 plus years. And starting out from really small, humble beginnings, a few people coming together and starting to pool their resources, credit unions now have in excess of $250 million in assets in this country. So I think we can't be deceived or, sleep and think that the numbers don't matter. We know the numbers matter, and our growth is probably one of the reasons why the government is moving towards having us regulated under central bank. But it's not unique to the Bahamas. Throughout the Caribbean, there's been a move to have credit unions move to the central bank as well. Standing in the meetings that I happened or was fortunate to sit in on central bank, understands that there is a difference between credit unions and banks. So, it's not where the credit union will be automatically looked at the same manner in which banks are looked at, because the purpose, again, in the operation of the organizations are different for the most part.
Now, I know that you've been visiting a number of the islands, and some of them are calling for credit unions because of the lack of a commercial banking institution. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. See, excuse me, that is something that credit unions do. It's not just about the day-to-day operation. You know, you set up shop and that's it. Credit unions are actually supposed to be community-minded organizations as well. We're supposed to educate not only our members, but the communities. We're supposed to reach out and help not only our members, but the community. And we have National Workers in particular has a mobile banking platform that we go pretty much anywhere as long as we can get internet access and, you know, open up full shop. All of our services and products can be offered on that spot. There's been a cry from the Berry Islands for quite some time where the citizens or residents of that island do not have a financial institution present, and they find it very difficult to conduct their financial businesses. And we have been in communication with them. We've visited them a few times, and we're trying to provide some service to them in as much as we can. And, you know, quite frankly, it's looking really, really good.
Okay. Sounds good. Just going back to the legislation, when you talked about this level of comfort for some persons, they feel that their investment or whatever the case may be more secure. Because of that, do you anticipate or expect an increase in business from the credit union sector?
Our business increase for this sector, and specifically for national workers, has been consistent over the last few years. Even more so now. Credit unions presently offer much better rates than the banks in terms of their deposits. We're very competitive in terms of our loan rates. And again, we're able to do this because we don't have the overhead that banks have. We don't have the bottom line drive that banks have. And, you know, I think at the end of the day, when people realize truly that credit unions are actually their financial institutions, not, you know, this is a Bahamian financial institution. This is a financial institution. Yes, that is Bahamian, but it's literally owned by me, the user. I think we'll continue to see growth.
In-depth commentary there from Mr. Poitier.
But good information.
Yeah, but he also explained that the credit unions are looking to establish credit unions in a number of family islands.
Exactly.
All right, due to the lack of commercial banks, making this bill an extremely timely one.
It certainly is. But before we go any further with this new bill, Julian, we're going to take a look back at some of the events that occurred during the last session of the House of Assembly.
30th of January 2014, the government approved construction for the BAMSI project and noted that the construction of the student dormitories, among other buildings, was critical to the institute's opening for September of that year. Consequently, on the 6th of February 2014, my ministry issued a letter of intent to contract Mr. Audley Hanna, trading as Paradigm Construction, to build the male student dormitory for the base amount of $2.6 million. The contractor was notified that formal contract documents would be prepared and that mobilization payment would be processed as soon as the ministry was in receipt of the contractor's business license, all risk insurance, and national insurance compliance letter. What the contractor did provide was only a quotation of cost from Royal Star Assurance for all risk insurance for a 6-month period from commencement of the project. It is noted that mobilization was issued thereafter. What the file does not tell me is who took the decision to advance the mobilization without the requisite insurance, what intervention, if any, was made to ensure that this requirement was met once identified, and why the contract, which has been substantially delayed, was allowed to continue. Mr. Speaker, this government has historically been about giving those in need a hand up. However, there can be no plausible explanation for an administrative error such as that which has occurred in this case. I should not speculate that any agreement existed, but if there was an agreement that for the ministry to advance the premium to the insurance company from the contractor's mobilization payments, this should have been done. I mention this because I'm advised that this has been done in the past to assist contractors' qualification for contractual works. In this case, however, it was incumbent on the contractor, having been paid full mobilization, to ensure that the insurance premium, which was a mere $23,746.65, was paid immediately. If he had done so, a certificate of insurance would have been included on our file. From the outset, therefore, the contractor was in breach. This is where we are. Given the fact that the dormitory was not complete and has not been turned over to the government, by contract, the contractor stands fully liable for the construction outlay today, which totals $2.5 million approximately. My ministry is now making a determination as to how we will recover this loss from the contractor. Since the fire, two options have been determined. The first is to cut the building to its foundation and rebuild, given the fact that the fire tested the entrails of the building. The second option is total demolition to rebuild a new structure. Estimates in hand target the reconstruction cost at around $5.5 million. The increased cost takes into consideration the cost to reconfigure the units, which has now been recommended, from single to double occupancy, having regard to the demands for space since was opening, ordinary inflation, and VAT. Consequently, the net cost to government will be the cost of reconstruction less the expenditure for the structure destroyed by fire. That is to say, just under $3 million. Mr. Speaker, I'm constrained to call out the actions of technical officers whose duty it is to be good stewards of the people's money.
Well, if you're just joining us, that was the Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Works and Urban Development, the Honorable Philip Brave Davis, who represents Cat Island, Rum Cay, and San Salvador, and he was talking about the issues at the Bahamas Agriculture and Marine Science Institute. He had tabled documents concerning specifically the lack of insurance, that was the fact that the building that was burnt by arsonists had never been insured.
Well, Julian, exactly. Following that fire that took place in January, the Deputy Prime Minister told House members, in fact, that the contractor had failed to make payments on the insurance. That's what he said initially. He also said that the insurance had lapsed. But during the last session of the House, he revealed that the contractor never submitted the all-risk contractor's insurance certificate. He only submitted a quote, rather, that would have been from Royal Star Alliance Insurance Company. And he also failed to pay that fee after he would have received the mobilization fee. So the Deputy Prime Minister, he tabled all of those documents in the House of Assembly, as you just heard. He called it an administrative error, and he hopes that Bahamians can take this as a learning tool.
All right, yeah. Well, the revelation, Janaea, didn't sit well with the opposition.
No, it didn't.
Of course, and
Central Grand
you can
Bahama
hear
MP.
from Central Grand Bahama MP Nico Grant and the leader of the opposition, Killarney MP, the Honorable Dr. Hubert Minnis.
That the building was insured and that the insurance lapsed because the project went beyond the projected date of completion, and the contractor failed to pay the renewal premium. He has come here this morning, Mr. Speaker, and has admitted that the building was never insured. Mr. Speaker, we are not speaking about a layman. We're speaking about an attorney who is an officer of the court and has the distinction of being a Queen's Counsel. For him to have made the statement emphatically, as he did, that the building was insured and that the insurance lapsed, and to come here this morning and omit that the building was never insured, it is obvious that he has misled this House. He is not only a member of Parliament, Mr. Speaker, he is the Deputy Prime Minister of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. He spoke about the pertinent documents, the all risk insurance, a business license, and a national insurance compliance letter. These documents, policy and procedure, requires that these documents be attached to every stage payment. We heard this morning that some $2.5 million has been paid out. The procedure is that the project officer generates the originating request for payment. It is then quantified by a quantity surveyor. It is then signed off by the Director of Works, and the treasurer, by law, cannot draw a check unless this procedure has been followed. There has been many stage payments made from what we've heard this morning. We still do not have evidence of the insurance ever been taken out, ever. If fraudulent acts have been committed, and it would appear that it has, I believe that it requires a police investigation. Secondly, since the member has misled this House, he should do the honorable thing. Mr. Speaker, this is a sad day in the Parliament of the Bahamas.
Thank you. Thank you, Honourable Member. Member for Kalani.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, as my colleague, the member here for Grand Bahama, had mentioned about the compliance letter for national insurance. Mr. Speaker, this is much more deeper than it appears. Our records would reflect that this same company, Paradigm, got a contract from the government in 2013 for $743,000, and they never kept the national insurance payment for its staff. In fact, Mr. Speaker, in September of 2013, only 4 members were paid for, and immediately after that, only 2 members were paid for. We need to know, how is it that a member who did not pay the national insurance premiums for its workers, how was it that they could have received a compliance letter? And our records also reflect, again, Mr. Speaker, that in addition to that, he still has...
Thanks so much for joining us. As you can see, the House of Assembly is about to begin, but you can tune in to the 1 o'clock hour for another update from Today in Parliament. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning.
Good morning.
It's a beautiful day in the Bahamas. We thank God for it. One of the heartening things this season is to see so many people turning to prayer. From the World Day of Prayer, prayers written by our own Bahamian people, to the various church groups and revivals. It's just wonderful. The Lord is perhaps saying something to us that we need to pray more. Our text today comes from the meaning of St. Patrick. It says, "My soul waits silently for God alone, for my expectation is from him. He only is my rock and my salvation. He is my defense. I shall not be moved. In God is my salvation and glory, the rock of my strength, and my refuge is in God." Psalm 62, verses 5 to 7. If we were here yesterday, I would give a brief biography of St. Patrick. But seeing that the walls are still looking kind of green, I will take the liberty of saying a few words. At 16, he was captured by the enemies and taken from his home, made a slave to feed cows and pigs. Always wanted to run away. And finally, the time came when he did run away. Went back home, became reunited with his family. But then he seemed to have heard voices, had this impression that God was calling him to do something better and bigger. And so he went back and became a missionary. Spent 17 years in a monastery, reading the Bible, praying, and learning how to teach the gospel. When I was in New York, going to college in 1955, I was pleased to be shown St. Patrick's Cathedral. Wherever you go in the world, you'll find a church or cathedral by that name. 17 years reading the Bible. Perhaps no wonder that March the 17th has been set aside as St. Patrick's Day. But we don't have to wear green to emulate this decent young man who became really an example. Somebody said he even chased all the snakes out of the country. That's just a legend, because they found out afterwards there were no snakes in the country at all. But the point about it is they gave him some good titles. They gave him some good titles. Happy to be with you today. And even though we are a day after St. Patrick, there's some good things that he did. His name means noble one. Noble man. One to be honored. And we're in this honorable house today. Let's honor our God and our fellow men. Let us pray. Gracious Father, we give you thanks this morning again for the privilege of being in this honorable house. Lord, we thank you for these, your servants, whom you've called at this time to represent your people and to lead our nation. We humbly ask your blessing on this entire Commonwealth today, our Governor General, our Prime Minister, the leader of the opposition, and all those who are in authority, especially those in education, teaching our children and helping them to get ready for their final exams, those who will graduate, and those who are taking part in sports. Direct us in business. Your word assures us that the borrower is servant to the lender. Help us to be careful of our credit, and help us not to hang our hats higher than we could reach. Forgive us our sins now, and bless our speaker with wisdom, with patience, to do today's business and to follow today's agenda. And we will give you humble thanks in the name of Jesus, who taught us when we pray to say together, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Amen.
Good morning, honorable members. Today is Wednesday, the 18th day of our Lord, 2015, of March, and I'd like to welcome you, each and every one of you, back to a continuation of a sitting of this honorable house. When we suspended last, we were debating, we had completed debate, and we were at the point of agenda called second reading and committal. Before we continue and with the House agenda, just a few matters and interventions the chair would like to bring to your hearing. Firstly, I'm certainly delighted to have so many of you visiting with us in the gallery this morning. Certainly the former member of this place and minister of this honorable house, Brian McCartney, along with his team of the DNA, Chris Mortimer, the deputy, and the remaining team members. We are delighted that you have visited with us this morning, and we wish you God's blessings and every success in your future endeavors. House, let us welcome them. We're also happy to have Mrs. Juliet Barnwell visiting with us, who has been around this place and this country for so long, serving in many capacities, along with the credit union and the cooperative movement. We're certainly grateful that so many of you have taken the time to be with us this morning. Honorable members, let us also welcome them. Second item, condolences to those who have suffered loss, and many of us have suffered loss over the last week or so, and I just wanted to extend condolences from my family and this honorable house to those who have, but in particular, the mother of the member for Cat Island, Rum Key, and San Salvador, Mrs. Dorothy Davis, Nee Smith. She will be funeralized on Friday the 20th at Zion Baptist Church. For members interested in attending, please be seated by 9:45. Mrs. Dorothy Davis. And so condolences to the family, the Davis family, and those who, and her loved ones, for her shining example of what good citizenship is all about. Secondly, the sister of the member for Long Island, Claudette Sylvia Francis Butler, also recently passed. I believe Claudette was in her late 50s, 57, I believe. And she is also being funeralized at St. Matthew's this coming Friday at 10 a.m. Let us hold their families up in prayer, recognizing that who God keeps is well kept. Though we mourn death, death is necessary for life. And we see the absence of the member for Marco City, who sends his apologies. The member is not here because, as we said, through death, life is necessary. So we congratulate the member for Marco City on the birth of his lovely daughter, Grace Christina Moss. Yes, good man indeed. And I understand very well. Mother and daughter, and apparently father, is doing very well. So let us keep them also in our prayers. Finally, honorable members, the chair has been increasingly disappointed in members' propensity for offending several of the rules of parliamentary debate. One in particular I cite today is the rule of relevance. Recognizing that perhaps this negligent practice has become systemic in this place over the years, it has now reached a level of bewilderment. Worse, though, it has denigrated the eminence of this parliament and created a culture of contempt for the process and the rules. Beginning this ensuing debate, this will cease. I pause. Thank you. Members will be accorded the first few minutes to, quote unquote, connect with their constituencies, and then they are expected to contribute to the substantive matter under consideration. In the spirit of cooperation and statesmanship, I've sought the assistance of both House leaders and have asked them to apprise their various caucuses. Consider this, honorable members, your formal notice. So if you have appeared today prepared to spew extraneous matters during a debate, it will not be allowed. That said, all members who wish to be heard on important matters will be assisted by the chair as to the appropriate place on the agenda to air a matter of national import. No member shall be denied an opportunity within the rules. You're reminded to use the available rules of procedure and or May's parliamentary practice to apprise yourselves of your duty in honorable debate. I am grateful for your cooperation. Now to the matters at hand, the agenda. The member for Fox Hill has, as Minister of Foreign Affairs, approached the chair with an intervention, communication by ministers under Rule 43. The chair will allow the member for Fox Hill at this time for ministers' statements. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Fox Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wanted to inform the House that following on a report that 60 people believed to be from Haiti slipped in undetected into Abaco and without visas in the early hours of the 12th of March, a period of more intensive checks has been mounted in Abaco by the Department of Immigration beginning today. Immigration officers were transported by HMBS Nassau this morning to Marsh Harbor and began immigration checks, assisting the local immigration force. The Department of Immigration is supported in this exercise by the Royal Bahamas Police Force, and the Royal Bahamas Defense Force is also on standby for support. The operations will unfold over several days. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Order that the communication be brought up. In order that the communication do lie on the table. Chair recognizes Honourable Member for Fox Hill.
Speaker. Mr. Speaker, secondly, on the 13th of March, 2015, there was a report in the Tribune by Rashad Roll which addressed the complaints of the wife of Jamaric Green, who is incarcerated in Cuba. He is a Bahamian citizen. Mrs. Antonia Green is quoted as saying the following, quote, that letters were written to the Minister of National Security and the Minister of Foreign Affairs seeking their help. And the story then ends by saying, quote again, I can't believe your spouse could have been arrested and convicted of a crime in another country, and no one from the government would make the effort to at least sit down with you and address your questions. Mr. Speaker, end of quote. Mr. Speaker, this is the second time that this matter has been addressed by me following on inquiries from the press. Earlier, I indicated to them that the narrative that was being told was not correct. The narrative persists, however, and so I'm going to provide the House with a full report of this matter from our ambassador in Havana. And it reads as follows. The Embassy of the Bahamas in Havana, Cuba, is fully aware of the case of Mr. Jamaric Green, as well as familiar with Mr. Green as an inmate. During my tenure as ambassador over the past 2 years, our embassy has paid consular visits to Mr. Green and all Bahamian inmates practically every month, which includes some visit by the ambassador. As recently as the 3rd of March, 2015, Mr. Green, along with other Bahamian inmates, received a consular visit at the La Condesa Penitentiary in Guinness in the Mayabec province, when he was visited by Consul Saunders, Attaché Carey, and Attaché Dr. Armenteros. During the aforementioned visit, Mr. Green appeared to be in good spirits and good health. He made no complaints during the said visit. His wife, Mrs. Antonia Ferguson Green, paid a visit to the embassy 2 days later on the 5th of March, 2015. Ambassador Adams met with Mrs. Green for at least an hour, discussing all matters of her husband's incarceration since the time he was here in Cuba. Additionally, she took time to meet with their daughter, and we've redacted the name, and to counsel about how to deal with her father's absence, to study her Spanish at the name of the school, which is redacted, in Stapleton Gardens, and to prepare her to be able to speak Spanish with her father when he returns to the Bahamas. One of Mrs. Green's primary concerns was that her husband felt that when he, along with others, were initially detained in Camagüey, they were not visited by embassy personnel. Attaché Armenteros informed me that he accompanied Consul Eugene Nuri on a consular visit to Camagüey to meet with Mr. Green and the 3 other detainees on Thursday, the 12th of April, 2012. At the time, they met with them personally, as well as with the prosecutor of the case and the Lieutenant Colonel Director of the Penitentiary, who informed them about the facts and the ongoing investigations of their case. Subsequently, Mr. Green and the other inmates were brought into the room where they had an opportunity to explain to everybody the facts surrounding the circumstances of how they arrived in the inland waters of Camagüey. Consul Nuri and Dr. Armenteros arrived at the prison for the meeting at 9 a.m. and departed at 2 p.m. On the 12th of October at 9 a.m., the 4 inmates were scheduled to appear for trial at the provincial court in Camagüey. Unfortunately, officials from the embassy were not able to be present at that time. However, it must be noted that even if they were present, they would not have been allowed to make any intervention nor assist them in any way, as their public defender assumed the full role of representation before the court on their behalf. Finally, please be advised that Mr. Green's status is recorded by the Ministry of the Interior as of January 2013 as follows. His name is Jamarick Shamarn Green. They give the name of his parents. His age is 28. They give his address in Nassau. They say which penitentiary he is, the number of the case. He's been sentenced to 18 years. The regime is severe. The date in was the 22nd of February 2012, and he's expected to get out of prison on the 27th of November 2029. Reduction in sentence is 60 days as of January 2013, and he's been in jail for 2 years. There are 3 other Bahamian citizens. The crime alleged is 3 other Bahamian citizens organized the transshipment of large volumes of marijuana from Jamaica to the Bahamas. The boat was damaged during the navigation at east of Cuba, and they made the decision to launch the drugs into the ocean and wait for time to ask for help. On the following day, 68 packages of marijuana with a net weight of 423.05 kilograms arrived in the Cuban coast at Sabinal Key in Camagüey. His behavior is good. His condition of health is good, and this is signed the Ministry of Interior, Cuba. Sir, says the ambassador, I'm satisfied that the Embassy of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas in Havana is doing all that is possible to be done in the circumstances to assist Mr. Green, but all of the other Bahamian inmates under our charge. Mr. Speaker, that was the report of the ambassador. I think it speaks for itself. The embassy and the wider government stands available to assist if there is anything further that the family thinks can be done. However, we are unable to either ameliorate the sentence of the inmate nor interfere with the legal procedures of Cuba. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Order that the communication be brought up. Order that the communication do lie on the table. Finally, before we begin, the chair was approached by the member for St. Anne's in his capacity as chairman of the Public Accounts Committee to make a brief intervention as relates to his duties as chairman and a special request. I received a copy of the communication, and I'm satisfied that the intervention is acceptable at this juncture. The chair will now recognize the member for St. Anne's if he is so obliged. The chair recognizes the honourable member for St. Anne's.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Public Accounts Committee requests for public hearing on the circumstances and facts surrounding the execution and construction of the Bahamas Agriculture and Marine Science Institute at North Andres, dated today's date, March 18th. Mr. Speaker, it is the duty of the Public Accounts Committee, in accordance with rules of this Honorable House, to examine accounts, expenditures, statements, and reports concerning all government spending, in particular government expenditures on matters of national importance and significance. Mr. Speaker, questions have arisen on public funds paid out by the public treasury for the construction and development of the Bahamas Agriculture, Marine, and Science Institute, better known as BAMSI. Mr. Speaker, there are numerous unanswered questions which were only multiplied after the recent statement made by the Deputy Prime Minister and the member for Cat Island and San Salvador. We, in the opposition, demand answers. The press demands answers. But above all, the public and the people of the Bahamas demand answers and deserve answers. Mr. Speaker, in accordance with the rules of the House, our committee has the power to call witnesses and demand that those witnesses provide all relevant documents and to fully explain and examine who appear before with a view of providing truthful answers to the committee and ultimately the public. Mr. Speaker, Parliament is often referred to as the people's house. We are the people's representatives, and we perform the people's business. This business should be performed in the sunshine for all the public to see. The information which has been revealed to date suggests that grave breaches of protocol have occurred, which have resulted in substantial loss of funds to the public purse, and unless addressed, addressed will continue to destroy the nation's faith in the system. Democracy demands that those responsible for BAMSI saga answer to the public and answer in the public hearing. Mr. Speaker, I hereby request that you facilitate our committee with the necessary staff and facilities for public hearing on the matter. Rule 89(1) provides that the proceeding may, upon request of the chair of the committee, be televised and broadcast over public radio, and I so request. Mr. Speaker, transparency must be the order of the day. There's a well-known quote in justice: injustice must just not be done, but be seen to be done. Therefore, I am sure the government will join me in supporting this request. Mr. Speaker, I am sure they are eager to appear before the public and provide all necessary answers to our questions. And I am sure they will support democracy and transparency. If they have nothing to hide, they will fully support me in this request for a public hearing. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The Chair recognized the Right Honourable Member for Centerville.
In accordance with the process of Parliament, and given the request just made of the Parliament by the Member of Parliament for St. Anne's, or I think it's St. Anne's. Sorry, I just ran up the stairs. Mr. Speaker, I've always said the opposition has the majority members on the Public Accounts Committee, and they should avail themselves of it. As to the nature of the request, that is within the province of the Speaker. But accountability, Mr. Speaker, goes to whether or not in the Ministry of Works there was a culture that even enveloped the Member of Parliament for East Grand Bahama, who was Central Grand Bahama, who was the Minister of Works. And just as they put into the public domain today, there is something askance with the process of the contract of BAMSI. I would wish the member to note, and the people of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, that when the committee meets, Mr. Speaker, they should request contracts that I could point out to them that they should ask for towards the country being able to understand whether the current Minister of Works is the only minister that has had such a challenge. That is what the committee is for. Never a limited, incisive cut on one subject matter. We are going to use it as a teachable moment. We're going to use it as a teachable moment, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, I simply say, Mr. Speaker, that that is what is going to happen when the Public Accounts Committee meets.
Very well. Thank you, Honourable Member. Right Honourable Member. The member for East Grand Bahama, you're not recognized. Take a seat. The member will recognize the member for Central Grand Bahama because he was implicated, and then the member for St. Anne's will close out. This is not going to be a debate, and we're going to end it there. Before you speak, member for St. Anne's, your communication order that it be, just order the communication be brought up. Let's deal with that matter. Order that the communication do lie on the table. Member for Central Grand Bahama.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, just let me say that if during my watch protocol was broken, it is wrong. It is wrong. The point that I wish to make here, that as the member at the time for Lakaya and Minister of Public Works and Transport, I never came in this house, I never came into this house and told an unmitigated untruth about a contract. I never came in this house and told an unmitigated untruth about a contract. Never have I, as Minister of Public Works and Transport, misled the House by telling unmitigated untruths, Mr. Speaker. That is the point.
Member for
the process. I do appreciate that we're not talking about a debate. But, Mr. Speaker, I simply said, Mr. Speaker, whether this minister or that minister did something to offend the normal rules of accountability will obviously be discovered. You could assume as Prime Minister, I would not stand here and opine unless I felt it was important for me to say so, and therefore having some access to the files that you left in place.
Thank you, right honourable member. Member for Central, we're going to put some closure to this.
Yes, sir.
But
yes, sir. Mr. Speaker, I reiterate that I have never in my life, as the Member of Parliament for Lakaya at the time and Minister of Public Works and Transport, came into this House and told an unmitigated untruth or misled the Parliament.
Very well.
If he had done what he did in this House as a QC in the courts of this country, he would have been charged.
Refrain. Member for St. Anne's, we're going to put closure to this. This is not a debate.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what I find interesting is the member for Centerville, in his role as the Prime Minister of this country, often come in here and tell us what the power of the Public Accounts Committee is. And we are the majority, Mr. Speaker. And we will not, Mr. Speaker, be directed by the member for Centerville.
Very well. Members.
And for, Mr. Speaker, the government had every opportunity on the accusations that he's making as the Public Accounts Committee when they was in opposition to investigate. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Members, thank you, honourable members. Now to the agenda at hand. It is my understanding that there are 5 bills, a compendium of bills. Yes, the chair was brought, right honourable member, in my speaking with the member for Fox Hill about that, would you prefer to make that communication now, right honourable member? Communication by members. Communication by ministers under Rule 43. The chair recognizes the right honourable member for Centerville.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish to announce to the House that the CARICOM heads of government will meet with the United States President Barack Obama in Kingston, Jamaica on the 9th of April. That I'm to travel to Kingston on the 8th of April for the meeting, starting with preliminary talks with Prime Minister Portia Simpson Miller of Jamaica, who will be the host Prime Minister, and I will chair the summit on behalf of the CARICOM heads. The subjects for the meeting proposed by the United States side are competitiveness, national security, and energy. Our ambassadors in Washington are working on a detailed agenda. Following the meeting in Kingston, I will depart for the Summit of the Americas of the Organization of American States from the 11th to the 12th of April in Panama City. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, right honourable member. Order that communication be brought up. Order that the communication do lie on the table. Second reading and committal of bills. Further second reading and committal of bills. A compendium. The chair recognizes the honourable member for Golden Isles.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to move for second reading and committal of the compendium of bills related to the Bahamas Cooperative Credit Union Bill. And those bills are the Bahamas Cooperative Credit Unions Bill, the Cooperative Societies Amendment Bill 2014, the Business License Amendment Number 2 Bill, the Financial Transactions Reporting Amendment Bill, and the Central Bank of the Bahamas Amendment Bill. Mr. Speaker, I will move we will debate all of the bills, and at the conclusion, I will move for second reading of the additional bills. Mr. Speaker, at the beginning, I would just like to, as you have done, recognize the presence of members of the cooperative and of the credit union movement here in the gallery today. I want to make a special mention of Mrs. Juliet Barnwell, who is present, who has dedicated many, many years to the growth and development of the credit union movement in the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, this process to bring us here today began in 2011, and this process is now culminating in these bills that are before us here today. During the interim from then to now, there has been extensive discussions, strong views expressed on either side of the debate, and what we are presenting here today, we believe represents a consensus amongst all of the stakeholders in the credit union and the cooperative movement. I want to begin, Mr. Speaker, by reading from the Bahamas Cooperative Credit Unions Bill that we are moving today, from Section 4, which details the cooperative principles. And I think it's important to do so, Mr. Speaker, because during the debate on what this bill will do is essentially migrate the regulation of credit unions in the Bahamas from the Ministry of Agriculture to the Central Bank of the Bahamas. And during the debate, Mr. Speaker, one view that arose was that this increased regulation, more robust regulation by the central bank, will somehow undermine the principles of the credit union movement, i.e. the credit union movement is generally seen as, credit unions are seen as organizations where the small man is able to go and access credit and derive financial services, Mr. Speaker. And one view was that with this migration, somehow these principles would be diminished. And I just want to read from the Act, the Bahamas Cooperative Credit Union Bill, the cooperative principles, Mr. Speaker, and then the following section will speak to the central bank's role under this Act. And I want to do so to demonstrate that it is the intention of this legislation that these principles be preserved. Cooperative principles, Mr. Speaker, a cooperative credit union registered under this Act shall comply with the cooperative principles specified as follows. For purposes of this Act, a cooperative credit union complies with the cooperative principles if no member or delegate has more than one vote, no member or delegate is entitled to vote by proxy, its business is carried on primarily for the benefit of its members, its membership is voluntary and available without any artificial restriction or any unlawful basis of discrimination to any person who can use its services and is willing to accept the responsibilities of membership. Any surplus or savings out of the cooperative credit union's operations is used for one or more of the following purposes: to develop its business, to provide or improve common services to members, to be distributed amongst members in proportion to their patronage with the cooperative credit union, to educate its members, officers or employees, or the general public on the principles and techniques of economic and democratic cooperation, to be contributed to non-profit charitable benevolent organizations, to be contributed to equity until total equity equals 10% of total assets, and to pursue cooperation with other cooperative credit unions. Those are the principles of the cooperative movement. It goes on to say without prejudice, a cooperative credit union may, with the permission of the central bank, do all other acts and things as are incidental or conducive to or consequential to the attainment of its objectives. Immediately following in Section 5 of the bill, Mr. Speaker, it outlines what the responsibilities of the central bank are, and I'll give a few of them. It says the central bank is responsible for the general administration of this act, determining the financial soundness of cooperative credit unions, supervising cooperative credit unions, registering cooperative credit unions, protecting members' deposits and shares from undue loss, monitoring compliance of cooperative credit unions with the provisions of this act or any other relevant law, and G, monitoring the conformity by the cooperative credit unions with the cooperative principles referred to under Section 4. I wanted to begin there, Mr. Speaker, to indicate that the intention of this migration of regulation to the Central Bank of the Bahamas is not intended to violate or to diminish the credit union's principles. Over the years, as I will demonstrate and as I am sure others will as this debate progresses, we will see that credit unions in the Bahamas, as they have around the world, have progressed from very, very humble and small beginnings to be the proverbial financial powerhouses that they are today. And so they must have been doing something right, Mr. Speaker. But the intention of this legislation is to enhance the regulation and supervision of those financial services providers. And ultimately, what we are doing here today, our intention is for the benefit and protection of the 40,000 plus members of credit unions in the Bahamas and the near $400 million in assets that they have accumulated over the years. And so, Mr. Speaker, as I move the second reading of this compendium of bills relating to the transition of cooperative credit unions to the supervisory and regulatory oversight of the Central Bank of the Bahamas, I do so recognizing that these bills are the Cooperative Credit Union Bill 2014, the Central Bank of the Bahamas Amendment Bill, Financial Transaction Reporting Act Amendment Bill 2014, and Business License, and as well the Cooperative Societies Amendment Bill, as I stated. These initiatives, we believe, herald a most significant inflection point in the regulation and supervision of credit unions in the Bahamas, as the government seeks to provide an oversight regime that is in keeping with the growing importance of the sector and a regime that would support its continued growth for many years to come. Mr. Speaker, credit unions have long been identified as important providers of financial services. Globally, cooperative credit unions have registered significant growth over the past 5 years. Globally, membership numbers 57,000 plus credit unions across 103 countries. They have amassed assets of over $1.5 trillion and have an estimated 208 million members plus. They have achieved an enviable average growth rates of 7.8% since 2009, and the asset size of the individual entities range from below $100,000 to as high as $145 million. Mr. Speaker, the picture in the Bahamas is a similar one. Credit unions have membership of over 40,000, which, if we were to put it in perspective, Mr. Speaker, that represents slightly more than 11% of our population. And they have aggregate assets in the region of $370 million and growing, Mr. Speaker. And they have achieved an average growth rate of over 8% over the past 5 years. Mr. Speaker, the Department of Cooperative Development in the Ministry of Agriculture, Marine Resources, and Local Government has been responsible for the regulation and supervision of cooperative credit unions under the Cooperative Societies Act 2005, Chapter 314. And at this time, Mr. Speaker, I want to congratulate the department for its support and guidance to the sector over these years. And we can see from the results, Mr. Speaker, that the growth has been significant, and the department deserves congratulations for the part that they played in supporting that growth and development. By way of background on what we're doing here today, Mr. Speaker, in 2011, the government of the Bahamas invited the Central Bank of the Bahamas to assume regulatory and supervisory responsibility for the cooperative credit union industry, having regard to three very important factors. Firstly, a recognition of the growing size and complexity of the sector and the key implications for financial stability should there be an adverse event. Secondly, the view held by international agencies, including the World Council of Credit Unions, that the sector be supervised and regulated by the entity responsible for financial stability, in this case, the Central Bank of the Bahamas. And thirdly, the desirability for greater consolidation of domestic financial regulation that would leverage existing expertise in financial supervision. And this would be the case, Mr. Speaker, with the Central Bank of the Bahamas as the supervisor of banks, and the similarity of the objectives of both sectors. And so the idea is that expertise exists within the Central Bank of the Bahamas, having regard to their role as supervisor of banks, and that expertise can be applied in the administration of this cooperative credit union bill. Mr. Speaker, this transition initiative acknowledges that the sector's increased level of financial intermediation, that is, the growth in its resources and lending activities, presents heightened implications for broader financial stability. And this is a key responsibility of the central bank. In fact, Mr. Speaker, there are many regional examples where central banks have responsibility for credit unions, including in Belize, Jamaica, Suriname, Barbados, Trinidad, and Tobago, where legislation is either enacted or is pending for the transfer of the supervision of credit unions from the Ministry of Finance to the various central banks. In all cases, there's the recognition that the growth of the credit union sector requires more rigorous regulation, consistent with international standards and best practices, including, for example, enhanced corporate governance requirements and specific provisions for the prevention of money laundering and the financing of terrorism. Mr. Speaker, to arrive at the point where we are today with these bills was a very lengthy and involved process, featuring intensive consultation with the sector, benchmarking of legislative proposals in other jurisdictions, and input from internal as well as external consultants. Mr. Speaker, to guide the transition of cooperative credit unions to the supervisory remit of the central bank, the government of the Bahamas secured a 2-year technical assistance program from the Commonwealth Secretariat and a steering committee comprising the technical advisor from the Commonwealth Secretariat, the governor of the central bank, the director of cooperatives, the director of cooperative societies, the manager of bank supervision, and the legal counsel from the central bank was established to lead 2 phases of this project. Phase 1 of the project, which commenced in September 2011, involved a comprehensive review of the operations and governance of the then 10 credit unions and the Bahamas Cooperative Credit League Limited to assess the strengths and weaknesses in their operations. An important deliverable of the project was to ensure that credit unions are managed to international standards, and so training opportunities, Mr. Speaker, were facilitated by the technical advisor in areas such as risk management, financial statement assessment, loan portfolio management, corporate governance, and board responsibilities. Phase 2 of the project, the steering committee reviewed the existing legislative arrangements, benchmarked other jurisdictions, and drafted the Bahamas Cooperative Credit Unions Bill. The Bahamas Cooperative Societies, the Bahamas Cooperative Credit Unions regulations, benefiting from consultations with credit union experts from the region and the World Council of Credit Unions. Mr. Speaker, these drafts were discussed at length with the Credit Unions Legal Framework Committee, with the directors and senior management of the credit unions, and with the Advisory Committee on Cooperative Development to ensure that the proposed legislation would not only codify appropriate regulatory standards, but also take cognizance of the domestic environment, our own local environment, and garner important feedback from the sector. So, Mr. Speaker, there was a very, very involved consultative process. Mr. Speaker, the steering committee also drafted the consequential amendments to the Central Bank of the Bahamas Act, the FTRA Business License, and the Cooperative Societies Act. I now move, Mr. Speaker, to some key features of the Bahamas Cooperative Credit Union Bill. I won't go through all of them, but I will highlight some that I think are particularly noteworthy. Mr. Speaker, the Bahamas Cooperative Credit Unions Bill before us today will provide a number of key legislative changes for the credit union sector. When brought into force, it will be administered by the Central Bank of the Bahamas and dedicated solely to credit unions, while non-financial cooperative societies will be governed by separate legislation. Clause 88 of the bill, Mr. Speaker, sets out the duties and powers of the Inspector of Banks and Trust Companies, who will be the central bank officer responsible for overseeing the supervision of credit unions. Mr. Speaker, and as I said, there was some concern expressed, Mr. Speaker, that the enhanced rigor of the regulation by the central bank might work to the detriment of the growth and development of credit unions, but I just wanted, and that is the reason, Mr. Speaker, I began with the reciting the credit union principles as are outlined in the bill, and moving on to say that the Central Bank of the Bahamas, in fulfilling its role as supervisor, will be guided by those principles. Mr. Speaker, the Cooperative Societies Act 2005 contains no provisions requiring the Director of Societies to assess the compliance of credit unions with the anti-money laundering or countering the financing of terrorism laws of the Bahamas. Although, Mr. Speaker, such assessments were carried out in practice by the Compliance Commission on behalf of the Department of Cooperatives. Clause 88.2 of the bill addresses this deficiency and includes amongst the responsibilities of the Inspector of Banks and Trust Companies the duty to conduct on-site examination and off-site supervision of the business affairs of each cooperative credit union for the purpose of satisfying himself that the provisions of our Anti-Terrorism Act and of the Financial Transaction Reporting Act are being complied with. Back to the definitions in Clause 2, Mr. Speaker, the bill will introduce new definitions for liquidity deposit, stabilization fund, and statutory reserve, omitted from the Cooperative Societies Act, but critical to the credit union's prudential operations. And each of these, Mr. Speaker, provides a reserve, so to speak, to ensure that the credit unions can carry on their activities seamlessly. Mr. Speaker, clauses 9 and 50 of the bill will provide more extensive criteria for assessing the fitness and propriety of managers and directors, respectively, of credit unions. Clause 16 of the bill contains specific provisions, including relaxed reporting requirements designed to support the development of small credit unions having less than $1 million in assets, and to ensure that all credit unions are supervised by a single regulator. Importantly, Mr. Speaker, these measures will give the smaller credit unions an opportunity to grow and develop before becoming subject to the more rigorous requirements to which cooperative credit unions having assets of $1 million or more are subject, Mr. Speaker. And as you will hear, this was a very, very strong point that was put. The view being that the smaller credit unions having to submit to the regulation of the same rigor of the larger credit unions, Mr. Speaker, would inhibit their formation and growth. And so this was a provision that was put to ensure that the idea of credit unions and cooperatives starting from small beginnings will persist. Mr. Speaker, members will note that small credit unions will be subject to a reduced statutory reserve allocation requirement than the larger credit unions, which must maintain reserves totaling a minimum of 10% of their total assets. And so, for example, a small credit union with less than $100,000 in total assets will only be required to maintain its statutory reserve at a ratio of 1% of its total assets. A small credit union with assets of $100,000 or more, but less than $300,000, will be required to maintain reserves of 3% of its total assets, and so on, Mr. Speaker. The other accommodations recognized for small credit unions are the submission of annual unaudited financial statements to the central bank, in contrast to the submission of audited financial statements by larger credit unions, and the submission of quarterly instead of monthly returns to the central bank. Mr. Speaker, there are a number of new provisions that seek to strengthen the corporate governance framework for credit unions, intended to promote their financial viability and the achievement of various strategic objectives, all within the required legal and regulatory framework. Clause 22 of the bill, for example, Mr. Speaker, will revise the requirements for quorums at annual, general, and special meetings of credit unions to address observed difficulties with established quorums. Specifically, 25 members will constitute a quorum where a credit union has less than 1,000 members. 50 members will constitute a quorum where a credit union has more than 1,000 members but less than 3,000 members. And 100 members will constitute a quorum where a credit union has 3,000 or more members. Clause 48 of the bill, Mr. Speaker, will introduce competencies for committees of credit union boards, which is important to ensure that persons elected to these positions are able to provide the desired level of contribution to the key lending decisions of credit unions. So there will be a need for experience in the area of finance and credit, Mr. Speaker. Clause 54 of the bill will prohibit members of the board of a credit union or members of a committee of a credit union from obtaining employment with the credit union unless they have abstained from serving on the board for any committee of the board of the credit union for at least 1 year. Clause 77 of the bill will remove the requirement for the board to authorize the credit committee to approve loans and instead empower the board to authorize the manager of the credit union to approve loans, in keeping with best practices that support operational efficiency. Clauses 81 and 82 of the bill will require credit unions to appoint a compliance officer and establish an internal audit function. Clause 113 of the bill introduces term limits for directors of the apex body, which is the Credit Union League, who may serve for not more than 2 consecutive terms. Clause 113 of the bill also introduces a requirement for the apex body to establish an investment committee to determine its investment policies and coordinate and oversee the investment portfolio. This is an extremely important corporate governance objective, Mr. Speaker, and construct, given the size of the credit union's funds under the League's management. The bill provides for the investment committee to comprise 3 persons, including a member of the League's board, approved by the central bank, and it also provides that these persons must have a sound understanding of investment risks and liquidity management. Clause 122 of the bill retains the exemption from stamp duty which credit unions currently enjoy, and Clause 123 of the bill will exempt credit unions from the provisions of certain statutes, including the Value-Added Tax Act 2014. As I mentioned earlier, Mr. Speaker, consequential amendments to the Central Bank of the Bahamas Act 2000 the Financial Transactions Reporting Act 2000, Business License Act 2010, and the Cooperative Societies Bill have been drafted. And just for the major points in these, Mr. Speaker, the Central Bank of the Bahamas Amendment Bill proposes amendments to the Central Bank Act to authorize the Central Bank of the Bahamas to regulate and supervise cooperative credit unions. And these amendments include the following. Clause 2 of the Central Bank Amendment Bill will insert several new definitions in the Central Bank Act, including a new definition of financial institution, which will include any person carrying on a business regulated under the laws enforced by the Central Bank. Specific references in the Central Bank Act to entities currently regulated by the Central Bank will be subsumed in the new definition of financial institution. There's a new definition of commercial bank. Clause 4 of the Central Bank Amendment Bill amends Section 35 of the Central Bank Act to enhance the bank's powers to require the submission of information and documents from a financial institution, a connected person, or a person reasonably believed to have information relevant to an inquiry by the Central Bank. I move to the Business License Amendment Bill, Mr. Speaker. The Bahamas Cooperative Credit Union League conducts insurance business on behalf of cooperative credit unions for the purpose of self-insuring members' loans and deposits. Section 182 of the Cooperative Societies Act provides that the Insurance Act does not apply to cooperative societies registered under the Cooperative Societies Act. This exemption has not been included in the Bahamas Cooperative Credit Unions Bill, Mr. Speaker, and therefore, insurance business undertaken by the League on behalf of cooperative credit unions will be subject to the supervision of the Insurance Commission of the Bahamas pursuant to the Insurance Act. As the government of the Bahamas would wish to encourage the continued growth of the credit union sector, the Business License Amendment Bill will exempt the League from the requirement in Part 2 of the first schedule to the Business License Act that registered insurance pay a tax on their gross premiums. The Financial Transactions Reporting Amendment, Mr. Speaker, proposes a consequential amendment to Section 3(1)(c) of the Financial Transactions Reporting Act to provide for the term financial institution to apply to cooperative credit unions. Mr. Speaker, the project to transition the credit unions from the Department of Cooperatives and the Ministry of Agriculture to the supervision of the Central Bank has been a very comprehensive exercise and could not have been achieved without the willingness and the stellar cooperation of the Minister responsible for cooperatives, my senior colleague, the member for Maikal, the Director of Cooperatives and his team, and the team from the Central Bank. With their commitment, we have been able to achieve the conclusion of an exercise that has been contemplated many times in the past, but only now is being realized. In addition, Mr. Speaker, special thanks are due to the credit unions, to the various credit unions, their boards and management for their constructive challenges and commitment of time and resources to this project. Their high level of engagement contributed tremendously to the legislative proposals we have here before us today and has demonstrated to all of us what can be achieved through consultation and cooperation. At the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, we all of us, have a vested interest in the proper oversight of the credit union sector and in enacting legislation based on the principles of safety and soundness that is proportional and that seeks to ensure accountability, consistency, and transparency in how the sector operates. And the bottom line, Mr. Speaker, and the ultimate objective is for the protection of the members of the various credit unions and of their assets. The credit union sector will undoubtedly continue to grow. I am confident of that, Mr. Speaker. And so today, I am pleased to move for the second reading and committal of a bill, the Bahamas Cooperative Credit Unions Bill, for a bill, I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, for a bill for an act to provide for the continuance, registration, supervision, and management of cooperative credit unions and for connected purposes. Mr. Speaker, I so move.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Do we have a seconder? The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Michael.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am very happy to have the opportunity to second what I conceive to be the best and the most important compendium of bills that have been presented to Parliament in a long time. Mr. Speaker, there is very little left to be said by me, since the mover of the bill spoke to just about everything that one could say about these bills. But, Mr. Speaker, it is important for me to second it, or second them, and I'd like to do so very briefly. Before I turn to the bills, though, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to salute the people of the Macau constituency, that is Magwana, Inagua, Crooked Island, Acklands, and Long Key, for their continuous support, Mr. Speaker. And I pledged many times before that the only reason that I am here is to be their voice and to speak for them on issues which affect them. And I make that pledge almost every time I stand, because it's important for them to know, Mr. Speaker, that had it not been for them, firstly, I wouldn't be here, and hadn't it been for the love that I have for them, I could have been doing so many other things that might have been more personally beneficial. But I chose these sacrifices over the many years because I came out of the belly of poverty. And my constituency, Mr. Speaker, is perhaps the poorest of islands in the Bahama chain. And so, Mr. Speaker, whenever I speak about those people, I speak very connected, because having been born there, having grew up there, when they suffer, I suffer, if only mentally, Mr. Speaker. And so I want to thank them for that. And I trust that over the last 15, 20 years or so, I've been able to represent them well enough for them to feel that the confidence that they have reposed in me was well placed. Mr. Speaker, I also want to extend sympathies to, if you permit me, I know the digression is out these days, and that's good. But if you permit me, I'd like to extend sympathies to the families of the constituency of islands that passed recently. And I particularly want to mention the family of Mr. Claygon Taylor, who was laid to rest over the weekend at 103 years old. He was from Masons Bay in Acklands, and Mr. Speaker, he lived many lives. When you consider how young people are dying these days, 23, 25, 19, his life is a testament to what God can do if you live for and trust him. And Mr. Speaker, I want to let them know I pray for them and their strength. After 103 years, he had made so many connections that would not be easily broken, Mr. Speaker. And the pain is deeper when you have been around anyone for that kind of time. I also want to extend sympathies, Mr. Speaker, to the Deputy Prime Minister and his family on the passing of his mother, who will be laid to rest on Friday. I know that he's strong, but the God who we serve is able to strengthen them in this their hour of bereavement. Mr. Speaker, I want to now thank members of the cooperative credit union movements some of whom are in the gallery. And Mr. Speaker, that is a small remnant of the many thousands that make up this wonderful body of people helping people to help themselves. And I will not be naming anyone, Mr. Speaker, except to say that every single person in the movements, credit union and cooperatives, have been, in my view, Mr. Speaker, a tower of strength to me. I've been the minister responsible for cooperatives for as long as I've been minister. And I share a connection with them. And I've learned a lot from them. And I hope that over the years I've been able to add to the several debates that we had, discussions, and together we make the cooperative and credit union business stronger. And so, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank all of them, from the League to every credit union or cooperative, and the managements of all of them for the assistance they gave me personally and to the Department of Cooperative during the time we were together. Mr. Speaker, finally, I want to thank the Attorney General's office and the Central Bank, together with the Department of Cooperative, led at the time by retired Director Mr. Nathaniel Adley, for all that they've done to bring us to where we are. Mr. Speaker, this was not an easy road. It's a Baptist hymn, for those who understand me saying it that way. It was not an easy road, Mr. Speaker, but we've come this far together. And Mr. Speaker, I say together because it's true. There had been consultations, many consultative meetings, and going back and forth trying to get this bill right, or I should say these bills right. And Mr. Speaker, it is important for me to say this at this juncture. When I first was introduced to the possibility of these bills being introduced, and the effect of them, Mr. Speaker, were to have taken the cooperatives, credit unions sector out of the Department of Cooperatives to the central bank, I had some misgivings about it. And some people probably still do, Mr. Speaker. You would never get 100% change in a very short time. It will take time for everybody to become accustomed to the change. But I believe I can say without fear of intelligent contradiction, Mr. Speaker, that most of the membership and management of the credit union and cooperatives, they understood the reasons and have come along. And so we do this with their support in a general sense, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I believe, too, that it is important for me to say that some of the changes which were made to the first draft bill ought to be credited to the fight which was in the belly of the movement, the credit union and cooperative movement as a whole. Because, you know, Mr. Speaker, the central bank and the governor of the central bank worked very closely with us to ensure that some of the beliefs which were held by the credit union movement were put in the contents of these bills. Because, Mr. Speaker, if we did not arrive at some consensus with respect to certain sections of these bills, we probably would not have been here today. And one of those sections, Mr. Speaker, speaks to the genesis of credit unions and cooperatives. Mr. Speaker, many people in the gallery today would have been around credit unions all of their lives. They know very little else. And, Mr. Speaker, credit unions and cooperatives don't normally start as banks. They don't even work like banks. When Sir Lyndon Pindling forecasted credit unions and cooperative societies in 1974 as an alternative to banks, the beginnings were simply to give the average black Bahamian, and Mr. Speaker, I say black with great respect, but at the time I knew his thinking from the expressions which I read was to ensure that the average over-the-hill Bahamian, not the Bay Street boys, had an opportunity to access credit, which otherwise they would have been unable to access had it not been for credit unions, cooperatives, and other social societies. And so in 1974, Mr. Speaker, he codified what his thinking was on this issue. And the first Cooperative Societies Bill was passed. And Mr. Speaker, you know and I know, and everybody knows, banks have very stringent qualifying rules. And sometimes, Mr. Speaker, it is very impossible for the well-intentioned, the able, and those who are willing to pay their bills and pay it on time. They still have problems, Mr. Speaker, even today, accessing banks' credit. Today, if you went to the bank to borrow $5,000, the rules seem to be that you got to put up $5,000 to get $5,000. Now, Mr. Speaker, credit unions and cooperatives do not work that way unless perhaps they don't trust you. But you can go into as a member of the credit union against what you have deposited and get a small loan for school fees and maybe a car. And now I'm advised they're even lending money to build houses. Without, of course, Mr. Speaker, I qualify that by saying you have to be a member. That's the qualification. But if you are a member, Mr. Speaker, you are able to access credit without showing your T-shirt, your bank book, where your children live. I mean, these banks ask for everything except the Word of God. They just don't want to hear but that. But you got to come with everything else you got. And at the end of 24, 48 hours, they still say no. Sometimes they still say no. They keep you waiting for 7 days, a couple of weeks, only to say no. And so, Mr. Speaker, these credit unions and cooperatives serves a national purpose. And I must say that the wisdom of Sir Lyndon and his forebears will always have to be recognized by even those who are unwilling to do so. And there may be some. Because sometimes political blindness do not allow us to always see. But nobody, even if they like Bartimaeus in biblical terms, could say that the vision of Sir Lyndon and his government did not cause the average black Bahamian to feel that they could belong to participate in and access something that otherwise they would not have been able to access. And that's why he is what they call Sir Lyndon. Not only a statesman, the father. The father, that's the term. There are many statesmen, but Sir Lyndon has been called, and rightly so, the father of this nation. That did not mean, does not mean, will never mean that he is the oldest man in the Bahamas. I mean, was. That's not the connotation that we should attach to that. When you are called a father, it makes different connotation when you say you look after your children. There are many daddies. Fathers are different. They look after, take care of, look out for. That's why I believe Sir Lyndon had that name attached to him, and I believe his legacy is closed as the father of this nation, because every person who's over 30, must recognize that he and his government provided educational opportunities, Mr. Speaker, provided national security, Mr. Speaker, by the defense and the police. He and his government. Prior to 1968, Mr. Speaker, those things did not exist. The average black Bahamian had no qualifications for which he could tender for anything. I'm talking about educational qualifications, Mr. Speaker. We didn't. We couldn't. The banks were literally closed to black people, to the extent that you could go in, but you can't work behind there. Where you going? If you try to go behind that counter, they lock you up. So, Speaker, the history of our country is rich, and we ought never to forget it. And those who want to put their heads in the sands like ostrich, like we just rose up like Topsy, they're wrong. They must know the history of our country, and who fought so hard to bring us to where we are, to talk about central bank bill. There was no central bank when he came along. None. And so I speak today with pride as part of a government that has a legacy. No matter how they try to blur it, no matter how they try to change it, you could stand on the beach of history, but you can't hold back the tide. And so, Mr. Speaker, against those things and those things which I said, I want to second the bill and say that the genesis of credit unions, Mr. Speaker, still remains with the Department of Cooperatives. That's one of the sections of the bill that I wouldn't say but we had to literally pry out to make sure it got in to this bill. Because when we first saw it, it did not include the genesis of anything. It was only to manage and regulate. But if we did not do it, Mr. Speaker, how would new credit unions and cooperatives be formed or begun? Because you got to start somewhere. The Teachers Credit Union, Mr. Speaker, the largest credit union in the list of credit unions, started with $70. 7 people putting $10 each, and then 3 people couldn't put nothing, I understand. They had the 10. But now look at them. Mr. Speaker, they have amassed assets of almost $45 million. And that's cash in the bank. or more. Just the teachers union, you know. And they got the biggest buildings, the biggest this, the biggest that, the biggest everything everywhere. And I'm talking about buildings now, Mr. Speaker. But the point I'm making, Mr. Speaker, is how was it started? It started very small. And that's why I encourage people in churches and people in schools, and as I go around the country and I talk to little junior local government councilors, Mr. Speaker, I encourage them to start little cooperatives in the schools, sell water. And there's a school, Mr. Speaker, which will be nameless. They sell more than $250 a week in their cooperatives in the school just by selling dollar bottle of water. And if you multiply $250 a week by 4, that's $1,000 a month that this little school cooperative is able to do by just simply selling students water. And if they could do it, Mr. Speaker, in schools at that level, some of the churches in our country, they're wealthy compared to other churches. Yes, that's the comparison. Why couldn't every church, Mr. Speaker, in this country that is sized of 100 and more members, why couldn't they start a little cooperative, if only to buy grocery on Fridays and distribute it to their members? Because if you buy in bulk, you could give members grocery cheaper than if each one went to the store him or herself. Why? Why can't they do that? And those churches with membership of 5,000 is even more compelling that they could start cooperatives and credit unions with only their church membership. Why can't they insure their members cars and houses and boats and planes? Why can't they do that? Self-insurance, Mr. Speaker. There's some big churches, rich, mega churches in this country. I'm just throwing out the challenge. I attend one of those big churches. I don't know all the members of my church. When I see them, I say, hi, I think I saw you before. But when you have membership of 1,500 and 2,000, it's difficult. I say that to say churches should, could, and I will go as far as to say will, because I'm a prophet in that regard. They will start credit unions and cooperatives. And Mr. Speaker, the philosophy is simply people helping people to help themselves. And with the cost of living and the brotherhood and sisterhood of churches and lodges, it's easy to start and operate credit unions under those captive conditions. Because they don't have to look for members. They're right there. Every Sunday, they're right there. Every Wednesday night, they're right there. And so we will see who will take up the challenge. But we are still ready, willing, and able at the ministry, Mr. Speaker, to give advice and assistance to those entities, churches, lodges, whatever, schools, that are willing to start little credit unions, little cooperatives, to do business for the members that make up those entities. Mr. Speaker, the mover of the bill spoke so, I guess, definingly. I don't want to mess that up. Because what he has said is hardly anything that I could say that will be different. Even though I may say it differently, it will be the same thing. And so I'm not going to touch that like that. And so I'm closing, Mr. Speaker, when I tell you.
Member, just continue to address the chair.
Well, you know, yes, Mr. Speaker, I will. Mr. Speaker, yeah, I'll leave that. I'm tempted, Mr. Speaker, but I'll leave that. But the truth is, Mr. Speaker, the bench on this side is very deep. And there is no need for me to repeat what was clearly spoken, unless I want to sound verbose. Verbose. That's a new word I found in the garbage can. But unless I want to lengthen my speech, that's really what I'm trying to say. So, Mr. Speaker, the mover, the member for Adley, I am a teacher, always a teacher. Can't take that from me. Yeah, I've been an educator. I'll die that. Okay, I'll fix it. I'll fix it. And so, Mr. Speaker, in seconding these bills, I just want to encourage all those who have anything to do with the implementation and the ensuring of the contents of these bills being tight and active, to do the best they can. Wherever there is a loophole, if we find them, we will close them. Because no bill is perfect. And this government is open to suggestions, even after the bill is passed. If there is the need to revisit any section of any of these bills, I want the League and other cooperatives and societies to know that nothing is closed. It will remain open forever and ever, as long as you have something to add or something which might not have been properly put in to be taken out. We are prepared to listen and do those things which will make the operation of these bills the way they should be. And so with that, Mr. Speaker, I thank you for allowing me to make that intervention. And I do second the bills.
Thank you, Honorable Member. We will use the Bahamas Cooperative Credit Union Bill. Members, we'll use the Bahamas Cooperative Credit Union Bill as the lead bill for the compendium of bills. It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read a second time and committed. A bill for an act to provide for the continuance, registration, supervision, and management of cooperative credit unions and for connected purposes. As many? The chair recognized the honorable member for Long Island.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I always say when I stand to my feet in this honorable chamber, that I'm here on behalf of the wonderful people of Long Island who have asked me to be their voice here, and it is my honor and privilege to always be able to speak on their behalf. I noted, Mr. Speaker, last evening, and I heard your admonishment this morning with regard to relevance and the fact that you would like for members to retain the decorum of relevance when speaking to the subject matters. And Mr. Speaker, today I do stand to speak on behalf of the cooperative compendium of bills. But with your leave, sir, if I may have a little latitude just to give thanks and to make some observations with regards to my constituency, I promise that I will be brief. I'd like to take this opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to thank you and the entire House body for your outpouring of condolences extended to my family once again, and we'd like to say thank you on their behalf. I wonder sometimes, in recent times, on behalf of my family, if they're not being tested like Job in biblical days with the amount of challenges and deaths that we have had. But like Job as well, Mr. Speaker, I am assured that we believe in the faith of our forebears and the faith that we're indoctrinated in, that the good Lord knows best and he does all things well, and so we still give thanks. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to extend condolences, obviously, to the Deputy Prime Minister on the passing of his mother, and I noted that both his mother and my sister will be funeralized simultaneously at the same time on Friday morning, so I would like to extend sympathies to his entire family. Moving closer to my constituency, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to extend sympathies to the family of Mr. Joseph Fox of Salt Pond, Long Island, and also the family members of John Smith of Alligator Bay, Long Island. And Mr. Speaker, just before I get to the matter at hand, I would be remiss if I were not to speak to the historic occasion of which a large group of Bahamian women, under the leadership of the delegation of the Honorable Member for Yamacraw, we attended just last week the United Nations for the 59th convening of the Commission on the Status of Women. Obviously, that was historic in that it marked 20 years since the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. And in that grouping, Mr. Speaker, you would find that the women were able to do what many in the country are not able to do. We were able to put our political differences aside. We were able to hold hands. We were able to be unified in the common good of not just standing for the rights of women, but human rights in general. And so, Mr. Speaker, I want to commend the entire delegation. I think it was at least 60 strong. And we had the former Minister Janet Bostwick in our delegation. We had, obviously led, as I said, by the Minister for Social Services. We had myself as a former minister. And we also had the Deputy Prime Minister's wife and a large grouping of non-civic, non-governmental agencies, civil society, and political organizations across the political divide of the Free National Movement, the DNA, and the PLP. I think the women should be commended for their great effort, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, moving to the subject matter at hand, obviously the mover of the bill outlined very comprehensively the purpose of this compendium of bills, and I commend him for it because we know that this has been a continuation of bills that has been started through various administrations, and so this is now the culmination of the regularization of the credit union aspect of cooperatives. I decided, Mr. Speaker, to take a look at what a cooperative really was. And I just wanted to read, and I will adopt if necessary, what the definition of a cooperative is. And it is an autonomous association of people who voluntarily cooperate for their mutual, social, economic, and cultural benefit. Cooperatives include nonprofit community organizations and businesses that are owned and managed by the people who use their services, as a consumer cooperative, or by the people who work there, a worker cooperative, or by people who live there, a housing cooperative. Hybrids such as worker cooperatives that are also consumer cooperatives, or credit unions, which is the one that we're probably putting the most emphasis on today, Mr. Speaker, because obviously credit unions fall within that facility of monies being loaned. And so it's a good step that the government is moving forward with this legislation to ensure that the central bank, which already exists, is going to have oversight for the regularization and the regulating of the credit unions. Mr. Speaker, as we move around the world and even closer to home, you look at the genesis of cooperatives. You look at the way Bahamians have cooperated in doing various things to promote themselves, to promote their communities, and to be able to empower themselves. I thought about ASU. I thought about the simple ASU concept, where people came together and they pooled their resources, and an individual each week, each month, whatever, is able to use those resources of the collective group. And they're able to lend in many instances, because if you're at the beginning of the ASU, you get the advantage of borrowing that money at no cost to yourself. And so I think things such as cooperatives are born out of that type of concept. And as we look around as to how we can empower our Bahamian people today, obviously cooperatives and credit unions that are a part of the cooperative society would certainly be a way for us to be able to ensure that every day common Bahamians are able to meet their desires, are able to empower themselves, are able to grow their personal resources, and are able to provide for their families. And that is what we have to look at as a people, Mr. Speaker. And so when you look at cooperatives, whether it's in the farming community where people come together and decide that they're going to buy their farming equipment, their farming supplies in bulk so that they can share it among themselves, obviously that is a cooperative. Mr. Speaker, we also look at housing cooperatives. You look around as you travel to places like New York, and you see tall housing developments. They are cooperatives owned by individuals, either through renting them or owning them, because they're able to come together. You may not necessarily know the individuals in your cooperative, but you're all coming together for a common good. And I think about the black crab syndrome when they say black people don't know how to cooperate together. And I don't say that in a derogatory sense. I say that in the sense that, you know, even black people, especially us, because we make up the majority of the persons here in the Bahamas, we have proven that we do know how to cooperate. You look at the Teachers Cooperative Credit Union, yes, and you see what they've done. You see the buildings that they have produced, and you see the monies that they are lending to each other to make them stronger. I noticed in Abaco during, well, I don't know if I want to remember this, but anyway, when we had the by-election, I happened to be staying in an area called Murphytown, and right on the corner there is a huge development that had been started by one of the credit unions. I think it's now a shopping center complete. The Teachers and Salaried Workers Credit Union. Mr. Speaker, obviously you see that cooperation of black people that are able to manage their resources, empower their membership, and not only that, invest on behalf of their membership. So when we talk about investment, this is a very real way that Bahamians can be included in the investment society. You talk about being able to save. You talk about being able to access credit at a reasonable rate where individuals do not have to take their hand, their leg, and their foot to give to the bank. I think that this is obviously, though new, this can be a renaissance in terms of Bahamians becoming owners of our society, owners of, absolutely, you know, my colleague from Engliston is reminding me that my grandfather, Sir Milo Butler, used to control the ASU in the straw market. When people could not go to banks and actually save, he took us by our hands and taught us how to go to people like Auntie Boo and them and collect their money every week and put that money in the bank on their behalf so they could have something. And that is what we are talking about in terms of empowering our people. And so, Mr. Speaker, I look at cooperatives as being a new, even old, but a new way that we can, in these hard economic times, help to empower Bahamians to become stronger individuals and owners of our society. I don't think that we need to get caught up in all of the consumer things that Bahamians like to buy, because obviously we need to start becoming an ownership society in a meaningful way. So small businesses can get microloans and they're able to pay them back. Small farmers, small entrepreneurs are able to do that. I like the fact also that these regulations take into consideration that not every credit union is as large as the Teachers and Salaried Workers Union. And so those that are smaller, Mr. Speaker, are not going to be held to such stringent regulations.
Members, could you keep your voices down?
Obviously, wherever monies are being gathered and borrowed and used, there has to be some regulation. But you also look at our burial societies in the Family Islands. Mr. Speaker, without burial societies in the Family Islands, especially in days gone by, individuals would not have been able to have been buried because they did not have the resources. Burial societies came together as a cooperative as well, and they were able to provide funding for burial casket. They were able to make sure that the deceased persons were prepared, that their graves were prepared, and that they were given a decent final farewell. And so when we look at the spectrum of cooperatives, we realize that that spectrum can touch every aspect of our lives. Mr. Speaker, one of the things that I enjoyed doing in my college days was to be able, when I had to go shopping, was to go to the Coop. And I think many of us would be familiar with the Coop, which is the short for co-op. And basically what they had created were large food stores, department stores, where things were purchased and members were able to go in and resource those goods at reasonable cost because everybody owned it. Mr. Speaker, even further abroad, you look at what the ILO has done in terms of regularizing cooperatives, and you go to Switzerland, and once again, you come across these Coops or these cooperative stores where when people want to go shopping for groceries, they know that they're going to get the best prices there because you don't have that huge overhead markup that regular food stores and department stores have, because the members are pooling their resources to buy in bulk and to make these various provisions available not just to members but to the wider public. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to say that even though I'm going to be brief this morning, this is a move in the right direction. This is a move in the right direction as Bahamians are hurting and reeling and trying to determine how best they're going to be able to use their scarce resources to continue to survive in this environment. I think cooperatives and cooperative credit unions are certainly the move that we need to embrace more widely. I commend the government that we are moving forward with the regulations, because one of the things that we also realize that when large sums of money or even small sums of money are being utilized, we've got to ensure that they're being administered in the proper fashion. And so, Mr. Speaker, I am very happy that Bahamians will have an opportunity to be able to have a system that they can believe in, that they would not have any hesitation in putting their meager resources into, and even those who have maybe more resources would be able to do it. The returns, Mr. Speaker, is not for just the individuals. The returns, Mr. Speaker, is for the development, the empowerment, and the overall growth of our country. And so I commend the government once again. I'm glad they're moving ahead with this. Like I said, this was something that I know that we had worked on under the previous administration and the administrations before that. But this is a very good move. I think we'd all come together today on both sides of the political divide and say that this is something that should happen. And so with those few words, Mr. Speaker, I want to say that Long Island, we could use some cooperatives. You know, things rough down there. The government ain't doing too much for us. So I ask you, please, let's get some cooperatives down in Long Island. Yes, you know, we need some cooperatives for Long Island. We need to be able to access some of this so the people of Long Island can be empowered. Mr. Speaker, I thank you very much.
Thank you, Honourable Member. As many? It sounds like we're going to wrap up, or we have a speaker. The chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Fort Charlotte.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's okay. That's okay. Mr. Speaker, I wish to follow up on the contributions made by the member for Golden Isles in particular in relation to the importance of promoting regulation for the protection of the interests of the Bahamian people. Mr. Speaker, since being elected to power in 2012, we have been asked to deliver on the promises that were made during the course of the campaign trail. And like many members in this House, I too have constituents who are either former or current policyholders of CLECO. and seeing that we are discussing a bill that talks about promoting sound regulatory authority and the protection of the welfare and interests of the Bahamian people, I wish to use this opportunity to speak on behalf of the people who have continued to call me, either via telephone or stop me in the street when they see me, to ask me what the government is doing in relation to CLECO.
Member for Fort Charlotte. The chair.
Mr. Speaker, I don't think that you wish to stop me from looking after the interests of the Bahamian people.
Member for Fort Charlotte, take your seat. Take your seat. The chair has made a ruling. The ruling is relevance.
Oh, this is very relevant.
No, this is not irrelevant. The chair determined it is not relevant, and you will follow the rules today, member for Fort Charlotte.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I surely will.
Very well. Member for Fort Charlotte, you may continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As you know, the Central Bank of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas is responsible for overseeing matters such. And by your admonition that we be relevant, I believe that all right-thinking Bahamians would acknowledge that this falls under the purview of the bills that we are tasked to debate here today. Mr. Speaker, like you, I am very concerned about Bahamians who have been adversely impacted by the CLECO debacle. And I've been asked to ask for the Bahamian people, or on behalf of the Bahamian people, whether the government intends to bring resolution to this particular matter.
Very well.
Mr. Speaker, I wish for the benefit of this House to read a letter penned to me by one such affected Bahamian that reads as follows. Dear Dr. Rollins, as per our conversation of yesterday, we, the former agents of CLECO, have suffered medical issues and have lost medical insurance due to unforeseen circumstances.
Member for Fort Charlotte, I think you made, you made your point. The point was already made, member for Fort Charlotte. The chair would prefer you to deal with the bills that are on the table.
I am, Mr. Speaker.
But you're reading a letter that is introducing another matter and another issue.
Mr. Speaker, I think if you would permit me, you would recognize the relevance as you allowed the member for Michael to expound on matters totally unrelated to the bill. I think you would permit something that is extremely relevant to the concerns of Bahamians.
I realize that. Deal with the bill, member.
Yes,
Deal with the bill. Deal with the bill, member.
Yes,
the
sir.
bills.
Since the liquidation, we have lost family members to death and funeral benefits were not
Member
paid.
for Fort Charlotte, take your seat. Member for Fort Charlotte, take your seat. Member for Fort Charlotte, take your seat. As many. Chair recognizes Honorable Member for Tall Pines. Member for Fort Charlotte, take your seat. I will not. You will not speak. You will not speak in this place unless you follow the orders from the chair.
Mr. Speaker, I am. If you permit me to demonstrate the relevance.
The chair has indicated you not to read the letter. Move on to the bills.
Mr. Speaker, this is central to what we are debating.
It may be central to it is not. It is central to your debate, but it's not central to the debate on hand. Deal with the series of bills.
Mr. Speaker, I presume, like all right-thinking Bahamians, that you are here to look after the interests of the Bahamian people.
I'm here to follow the rules.
To suppress that discussion for something that is very central.
I have. The chair has indicated that members will be allowed opportunity to bring extraneous matters that are of national import. It is not to introduce new matters as it relates to the bill. Now, keep this in mind. I am not going to argue with you, member for Fort Charlotte. You will follow the instructions of the chair, or you will resume your seat. Period.
Mr. Speaker.
Member for Charlotte, take your seat. Member for Fort Charlotte, take your seat.
I will be relevant, Mr. Speaker.
You will be relevant.
I am being relevant. Yes,
very well. Yes, you may continue.
Mr. Speaker, as the regulatory authority for this country, I believe that we have a duty, we are duty-bound, Mr. Speaker, to promote legislation as we are attempting to do today that seeks to protect the interests of hard-working Bahamians who have placed their trust in every elected member to come into this place and fight for and on their behalf. Mr. Speaker, like cooperative credit unions, we know that these pieces of legislation are designed to ensure that their savings are not put in jeopardy by the actions of politicians or a parliament that is totally insensitive to the needs of Bahamians. So, if you know, Mr. Speaker, that cooperative credit unions are becoming a greater part of the savings apparatus of the people of the country, quite naturally, a responsible government would in fact seek to put in place protections so that cooperative credit unions do not in the future find themselves in a situation where they are no longer able to account for those savings, as is the case with the CLECO debacle. Mr. Speaker, that is why we're here today. Because we do not want to have a repeat of what happened with CLECO. Now, if we were on the campaign trail and we said we would bring about regulatory reforms, I think it's only natural that we not only speak to the importance of passing legislation in this House that protects those interests on a going forward basis, but also looks after those monies that were entrusted to bodies that fall under the regulatory purview of the Central Bank of the Bahamas that are to this day not being accounted for. Mr. Speaker, I can assure you that my interests are not to be disrespectful to this House. And my interests are not to be provocative to the extent that it appears that I do not understand your position and the process that you seek to promote. But, Mr. Speaker, all I ask for is fairness for and on behalf of the interests of the Bahamian people. Because the fact is that there are still Bahamians that are paying their hard-earned money because of an admonition by a former leader of this country that this matter would one day be resolved.
He told them, pay the bill, pay the premium.
And he said that the government could no longer protect them if they stopped paying their monies.
Yes, he did.
And that is why Bahamians to this day are still paying, because they believe that if the leader of the country makes a promise, that is what they will hang their hat on. But, Mr. Speaker, I am a member of an organization that heard the cries and the calls of the Bahamian people. And we said that when we, or if we were elected to power, we would seek to bring redress to this matter. And as it said, a promise made should be a promise kept. But, Mr. Speaker, should we now, for the benefit of these people, tell them that they should no longer continue to pay into these policies because the government is not prepared or is unable to resolve this matter? We're seeking to do it with the cooperative credit unions. Are we to tell them that we're not prepared to do it in relation to CLECO? Because, Mr. Speaker, the cries out there are that we are disconnected from the realities of the Bahamian people. The cries are that we do not care about the welfare of the Bahamian people. That we live in a political bubble, Mr. Speaker. And the question is, will we once again demonstrate to the Bahamian people that we only care at election time, when we are out there jostling for votes? Mr. Speaker, I don't believe that that is the type of government that you want to promote or that the people of this House seek to promote. Because rest assured, the same way that you gave notice to those who are in the gallery today as an opposition party, they too will promise that they will hear the cries of the Bahamian people and that they will answer their call. If not us, then who, Mr. Speaker? And if not now, then when? Are we prepared to deliver the next election on a silver platter to those who have been untried and untested because they have no history of having betrayed the Bahamian people, Mr. Speaker? Because at this point, the Bahamian people are prepared to give anyone a chance who has not had a record of failing to deliver on a promise. I think anyone in this House who fails to hear the cries and the concerns of the Bahamian people will pay a dear price in the next election, Mr. Speaker. And that is why the member for Golden Isles has been tasked to come here today to pass this piece of legislation. Mr. Speaker, I wish to, and I accept these as my own words, I wish to lay this on the table of this place. Because this particular Bahamian, as a representative of those who have been unfairly harmed by the failure to properly regulate the insurance industry of this country, they have indicated that, and if you would permit me, Mr. Speaker, so you and the Bahamian people can appreciate the degree of hurt and frustration that this matter has brought to bear on so many Bahamians. If you would permit me to, so Bahamians can appreciate it, Mr. Speaker, because I believe that you are as sympathetic.
Save it, member, save it. Then you will afterwards.
Adrian, paraphrase what you have to say.
So you don't wish to hear it, Mr. Speaker.
Afterwards,
encapsulate it and paraphrase what they said.
And I'll say this. I'll say this. Then
you will resume your seat.
You won't allow me to read it, Mr. Speaker. I understand that. But Mr. Speaker, the concern is that their mortgages are in arrears. Banks and other lending institutions are foreclosing on their homes. Property is being repossessed. Vehicles are being repossessed. And they go on to say, Mr. Speaker, that some people are losing their sanity as a result of it, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the member for South Beach suggests that they should have gone to the credit union instead of going to CLECO. I don't believe that that is the response that they expect to hear, Mr. Speaker. Because after all, the government has a fiduciary responsibility to ensure that anything that they give license to, and CLECO was a licensed company under the Securities Act. They were licensed, Mr. Speaker, and they would expect to have a response, if not from the member for Seabreeze or the member for Senegal.
Member for Charlotte. Members, honorable members. Right honorable member for Centerville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as the member has raised a matter of consequence to people and their future, and it is a matter that the government has under advisement, I think it is important for me to say, Mr. Speaker, that in a nutshell, when this government came to power, it did not have the money in place to deal with that issue because it will require money to bring a successful outcome. Secondly, we have, Mr. Speaker, been given considerable thought to what is a very complex issue involving international creditors, other jurisdictions that are dealing with it, and we believe, Mr. Speaker, that when we come to a certain period in the next few months, that we will be able to speak comprehensively about what we propose to do, Mr. Speaker, by way of assisting those persons who have suffered as a result of CLECO. So to the member who has raised this matter, it has not been abandoned. It is a continuation of the process, and we are looking to an outcome that we hope would be the best outcome that the country could afford.
Thank you, Right Honorable Member. Member for Fort Charlotte.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Get to the bills.
And I take the fact that the Prime Minister and Minister of Finance's response to my contribution validates me raising the point in this House, because all of those who have been so impacted appreciate hearing from the Minister of Finance, because their welfare is being addressed. And so, Mr. Speaker, had I yielded, perhaps I would not have gotten the Prime Minister to speak to it, but I'm glad he did.
And so now the nation hears him.
And so now the nation hears him, Mr. Speaker. And those who have been impacted by the debacle that is the CLECO debacle have a sense of hope. And they appreciate that we have come into this place to fight for and on their behalf. So I feel vindicated, Mr. Speaker. I feel vindicated, Mr. Speaker. But having said that, I applaud the efforts of the government to promote greater regulatory responsibility and oversight in industries that deal with the welfare of the Bahamian people. Because, Mr. Speaker, and I wish, even if you would not have me read it, I wish to enter this into the record of this House so that members of the press can have a copy of this letter, so that if they wish for the Bahamian people to be able to feel the pain of these people who have been impacted by this CLECO matter, it can, in fact, be included in the records of the press in their reporting on this particular matter. So I take this and accept it as my own words, and I will enter it into the records of this House, Mr. Speaker. And I ask for all members, not just those who are members of the opposition, but I think those of us who are members of the government, we have a duty to continue to fight for the Bahamian people. And when we do so, Mr. Speaker, it is so that we can bring relief. Relief that Bahamians are very much in need of right now. So I thank you for giving me this opportunity, and I support these attempts to promote greater regulation in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. With great reluctance, order that the letter be brought up.
The Speaker is a very fair man. I don't agree with that.
Order that the letter do lie on the table. As many? Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Tall Pines.
Ladies first, Mr. Speaker. Go ahead, madam.
The member yields. The chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Yamacraw.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. And I must say that it's great to be back in the country from the very cold weather that we experienced in New York. And let me indicate, Mr. Speaker, that I am always delighted and give thanks to God and the fine people of Yamacraw, who I am privileged to represent in this place. Mr. Speaker, I wish to make a brief intervention with regard to the Cooperative Society's amendment, the Bahamas Cooperative Credit Unions Bill 2014. But before I do so, I would wish to offer my condolences to the Deputy Prime Minister and family on the passing of their matriarch, also to the member for Long Island and family on the passing of her sister, to Mrs. Vilma Thompson Curling, Spain Thompson and other siblings and the children of Mr. Theophilus T. Thompson on his untimely death. Mr. Thompson is a resident of the was a resident of the Yamacraw constituency who resided on Australia Avenue in Elizabeth Estates. He was a very flamboyant character, and he will certainly be missed from the streets of Elizabeth Estates. Also, I would wish to pay tribute to and to offer my condolences to Mr. Raymond Farquharson and his two children and family on the passing of Mrs. Betty Farquharson, who was an assistant director in the Department of Social Services, working in the Department of Rehabilitative Welfare Services. And I wear this color today because I've just come from a service where she was memorialized by her colleagues in the Ministry and Department of Social Services this morning at Bahamas Harvest Church. Mrs. Farquharson was a consummate social worker who cared deeply about people and was very, very involved in the work that she did. This morning, Mr. Speaker, to hear one of the residents of the homes that come under the Health Social Services, homes for persons who have certain psychological challenges, sing to her this morning was really heart-rending. And to see the numbers that turned out this morning at that memorial and pay tribute to this fine, fine woman of God and social worker. I really wish to commend her and say, may the souls of all those persons I've mentioned rest in peace. Mr. Speaker, I also wish to join the member for Long Island in speaking to the 59th session of the Commission of the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women, which was, as she indicated, attended by a 60-plus delegation of women from several NGOs all across the political divide. And, Mr. Speaker, we were honored to have, as a guest of the government of the Bahamas, the Honorable Janet G. Bostwick, who, at the time when the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action was the minister, was signed onto by this country, he was the minister. And we were able to, in our national report to the entire General Assembly, pay tribute to Mrs. Bostwick as having been the minister at the time, and also Ms. Phaedra Raming, who was and Christine Campbell, who were a part of the delegation in 1995. So, Mr. Speaker, it was a grand time, full of work. The NGOs were happy to be able to network and gain exposure in the UN with their colleagues from throughout the world. And we are also indicating that I was able to also speak on a panel with regard to nationality laws, and to be able to lay the case as to where we are with regard to the amendments to our Constitution to pursue equality for women in the law. And so the women are very excited about that. We expect to meet with them and to be able to chart our course in support of our efforts here in the Bahamas. Now, Mr. Speaker, I too would wish to really extol the virtues of cooperatives. And I am delighted to see many persons from the cooperative community here. And if I'm not mistaken, I see Mr. Roosevelt Finlayson, who may have been, it's been a long time ago, the first director of cooperative development, I think, in the ministry, if I'm not mistaken, but I acknowledge his service there. The second, he's saying he was the second person. I know also of Nathaniel Adley, who I think is now the serving officer. But did a commendable job. I also see, of course, Mrs. Sonia Cox Hamilton, who has also served and continues to serve in that area. So I really wish to commend the work of cooperatives and what they mean to our people, particularly persons who cannot qualify for loans through the regular banking system, but not so much that part is important to me. What is so important to me, and I think too should be important to us as a country, not just the fact that they're able to come together, ordinary people, and to provide a very, very much needed service, but the savings process to me is extremely important. And I wish to commend it because I am a part of it. When I worked in the hotel industry, Mr. Speaker, many years ago, just before I came into this season of my life, I was able to actually join a credit union at the hotel where I worked. And what was so amazing to me was that even with the little that I put in, as I just saw it mushroom, And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, if it wasn't for that, in 2007, when I was out of office, I wouldn't have had a car. So I was able to purchase a car at the time, you know, when we came out of office. And I have never dropped it. I continue with it. And not just an account for myself, but also I have an education account for my daughter. And every year, I'm able to purchase her school supplies, get a school uniform, take her off on a little trip, and when she demands these computer gadgets and stuff, be able to do it. And so I also know of others who tax it even more heavily than I could ever do. But it has become a source of savings for so many Bahamians. And from my experience as the Minister of Social Services and what I see happening in our country, particularly with our people, many of them do not know how to save. And saving is so important. It could even be just $1. If you put $1 in every month, or if you could push it to $5 a week, you will be surprised to know how it will mushroom. And so I was able to see my savings become a benefit to me. And of course, all the usual, well, you always have to certify, or be qualified in terms of they're very stringent on trying to find what you want it for, even though it's your own money. But, you know, it's the ease of which it can be done for a whole lot of people who cannot qualify for loans, etc., through the regular banking system, I think is very good. And so I commend it to our people. And I say to persons everywhere who are able to, if you put $5, $20 a week, you will be surprised to know what can happen. You must try not to touch it too often, though, because certainly you only will get, well, you'll get more than what you put into it, but it forms a base for you. And when I say get more, because you could borrow, I think it's double what you have in the, I think it's double what you have there. But they always make sure that you don't borrow too much that you can't pay them back if you run into trouble. But, Mr. Speaker, I commend the cooperative credit unions to our people. And above all, I commend savings to our people because it is, I think, very, very important. Bahamians don't know how to save. And then when hard times come, they are in a lurch. And so I really wish to encourage our people to save. And specifically, too, from where I sit, Mr. Speaker, I started to say, why I want to encourage our people to save. And also, I want to encourage them to learn how to manage their funds. Mr. Speaker, we are going through a process right now in social services with the prepaid Visa card, a process of reassessment. And going through that process, we have seen where many Bahamians max out their salaries. They max out their salaries. They're making good money. They're maxing out their salaries. And then they expect to get assistance from social services. And so I believe that anytime I have an opportunity to speak to it, and I thank God, too, that through the process that we're going through social services, this prepaid card and the modernization of the delivery of services, the social workers will be freed up to do more counseling with clients, financial counseling on how they should save, how they can save, how they can manage their funds to ensure that their families are taken care of. So I just wish to say that we look forward to being able to help our people to manage their funds and to encourage them to be able to save, even if it's only just $1 a week. It adds up. And I want to commend the minister and his team, the Minister of Finance and the Minister of State, and their team for bringing this legislation, which I think has been long overdue because, as we say, you know, it's an area that must be regularized. It's required to be regularized. And I believe the benefits through this regularization will inure to the betterment of our people. And so I certainly commend the minister and his team and indicate that definitely our people ought to take advantage of what is happening at the cooperative unions. I think I recall at one time as well, as our church, I think convention was looking into, and I don't know if they ultimately did it, was looking into establishing a cooperative for the Baptist churches. And so it doesn't matter what area you are in, once you could get, you might even be able to just get a community. That's a good idea for Yamakro and for other constituencies, to be able to pull your constituencies together, of course, and to fund. Yeah, yes, definitely. That's right. That's right. And as the member for Long Island said, look here, when we were in New York, we ain't had no colors. We ain't had no political parties. It was just women, Bahamian women. And we had a wonderful time, transcending all political divides. And so...
That's another story.
But as women, we have decided, particularly those issues that are pertinent to women, that we will not be divided on those issues. We will not be divided on those issues. We're not going to be divided because there's some things that must be done in this country for women, and you will be hearing a whole lot more about it as we move forward. But we don't leave the men out. We invite them to join us, because what is good for women and children is good for the nation. There's no doubt about it. It's no doubt about it. What was that point?
Irrelevance. Irrelevance.
Mr. Speaker, that is a very relevant point, because guess what? Most of the beneficiaries of this cooperative credit union bill will be who? Women. Women and children. You hear what I talk about? I talk about my account and my daughter's account. You hear me say anything about my husband's account? But he has his own account.
You throw Griff on
No,
the
Griff has his own account. He has his own account. But I can tell you, when it comes to women and children, when you're speaking to what happens in the life, you're talking about the family generally. And so I know that women and children and men, the whole family benefits from this legislation. And so, Mr. Speaker, today, Yamacraw supports these compendium of legislation, and it is our hope that we will see the credit union system continue to grow to the benefit of our nation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. As many, Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Tall Pines.
No, Tall Pines, no.
Member for St. Anne's, you stood up and you sat down. The chair doesn't recognize that movement.
Yeah, go ahead, Tall Pines. Go ahead. Go ahead, Tall Pines.
Because I was getting
Very well. So, member for St. Anne's, you are. Member for St. Anne's, you're the next presenter.
No, I just wanted to reserve my spot because I was next.
Very well, very well.
Right.
You recognize. The member yields. The chair recognizes the member for Bain and Grand Star.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House suspends until 3 p.m. on Wednesday, 18th March, 2015.
It's moved and seconded that the business of this House suspends until 3 p.m. on Wednesday, the 18th of March, 2015. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. The business of this House suspends until 3 p.m. this afternoon.
Quite a bit coming out of the House of Assembly this morning as they debated the cooperative credit union bill. Yamacraw MP, Minister of Social Services and Community Development, Melanie Griffin, being the last speaker there. But of course, some sidetracks there generated by the Fort Charlotte MP, Dr. Andre Rollins, who brought up the issue of CLECO, which is very important, but really wasn't on the course for the agenda. But it did prompt the Prime Minister to make some comments, saying that the government didn't have the money in place to deal with CLECO when they first came in, and it is a complex issue involving other jurisdictions, which is still being worked out, and they should have the best outcome within the next few months or so. Also speaking today, Loretta Butler Turner, the Long Island MP, V. Alfred Gray, who seconded the bill, Michael Halkitis, the Minister of State for Finance, actually tabled the bills. There are 5 of those co-op bills. Now, prior to the issue of all of that, we heard from Fred Mitchell, the MP for Fox Hill, who read a letter regarding a Bahamian who was in prison in Cuba. The St. Anne's MP, Hubert Chipman, talking about the Public Accounts Committee, and that they are seeking to actually have a public hearing, which they hope to broadcast live on radio and television, regarding BAMSI. They want to find out all of the details regarding BAMSI. Now, at some point, the Prime Minister actually made some comments that got to the Central Grand Bahama MP, saying that there may be some things that he suggested really that the Honorable Nico Grant may have done some things that offended accountability during his tenure as Minister of Works. And of course, this caused the former minister to be quite upset, quite irate, defending his character. Now, the Prime Minister also advised that he would be heading to Jamaica for the CARICOM Heads of Government meeting, which they will meet with the U.S. President Barack Obama, and that's on April 9th. The Prime Minister, of course, who is CARICOM chair, will chair that meeting. From there, he will head on to Panama for the OAS's Summit of Americas in Panama. Now, Janaea Noel Ferguson is at the House of Assembly. Is she ready for us right now? Let's take it to Janaea Noel Ferguson, and let's find out who she has with her today.
Thanks so much, Julian. Quite a number of issues coming out of the House today as parliamentarians began debate on the compendium of bills that will impact the credit union sector. I'm joined with the Minister of State for Works and Urban Development, Mr. Arnold Forbes. Now, Mr. Forbes, during this morning's session of the House, the chairman for the Public Accounts Committee, he's now calling for a public inquest into these matters. What are your thoughts? I know you said you now want to review all of those contracts concerned with BAMSI.
Yes, I very truly I welcome the inquiry. It will show that what has happened with the fire and the situation. There was just a glitch on the screen. Listen, this government is about transparency. It's about putting all the cards on the table. We have nothing to hide in what has gone down at BAMSI, and we believe that we'll be vindicated at the end of the day as far as that is concerned. I am in the process now, and I should have final conclusion as far as review of the state of the contracts. And I believe from the preliminary reports that there are many buildings that were insured. The contractors mostly, from what I am told, have some coverage. But I want to review the entire thing. I want to go back at it. I want to make sure that not only coverage for April or May. I want coverage until the end of this project, and it will not be. There will be no exceptions. That is what I will be operating on, because I want to protect the people's money. Because this is public funds that we're spending. We want to ensure that everyone is covered properly. That everything about that project is as transparent as it can possibly be, and that's what I'm looking towards doing.
And when we look at the happenings within your ministry, we got some suggestion from the Prime Minister that there is a culture of some sort within that ministry. Any action being taken there?
Absolutely. There are some irregularities that have been noticed, and we are in the process. The Deputy Prime Minister and myself are in the process of correcting those. And there's a consequence for every action or every inaction, I would say. And I believe that the Deputy Prime Minister will address those issues very succinctly, outlining what has happened and the actions to be taken and the future stopgap measures that will be put in place to ensure that something like this never happens again. But I can tell you that BAMSI will be fully regulated. All the transactions that are going on at that site from this point forward will be above board. There is nothing that will be untoward, and I'm sure that the Accounts Committee report, the Public Accounts Committee report, will prove that that is not the norm as to what has happened with this contract, and we will get that sorted out.
One final question. The public, or some in the public, are calling for heads to roll on this issue. And you talked about the DPM looking into the matter, those administrators within the Ministry of Work.
Yes, and that is something that I'm sure he will address publicly very shortly. And I believe that we will correct the wrongs that have happened, but not only just recently, These are things that probably have been happening for a very long time. The Deputy Prime Minister will put a stop to it.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. That was Minister of State for Works and Urban Development, the Honorable Arnold Forbes, who is also the MP for Mount Moriah. I have joined with me the chairman of the Public Accounts Committee, Mr. Hubert Chipman, who is also the MP for St. Anne's. Mr. Chipman, you called for that inquiry today. Why was that so important for you to do?
It is important as to what transpired in the House last week when the Deputy Prime Minister got up and said that there was no insurance. We've been calling for contracts and details of contracts probably from the inception of BAMSI. It fell on deaf ears until this building burned. And once the building burned and after our tour of BAMSI, we just thought it appropriate to call for an open forum so every Bahamian could know. They can listen to it on the radio in the Family Islands. They can hear it, come and attend the sessions. So we just thought it appropriate. And I think we would get more out of it rather than once we subpoena various people to come before the committee.
Now, the Prime Minister also suggested that what is happening in the Ministry of Works could date back to when a member of your party was the Minister of Work.
I am not concerned with what the Prime Minister said about what happened prior to this session of Parliament. I am concerned with this session of Parliament. We are the majority as far as the Public Accounts concerned. Public Accounts Committee is concerned. I'm the chairman and I dictate what we go after. The Prime Minister have no jurisdiction over the Public Accounts Committee.
So even if things do come up where it may have impacted what happened before, that's not something you hope to look at?
We are dealing with BAMSI and only BAMSI at this particular time. I hear the Prime Minister very often get up in the House of Assembly and said, oh, we are the majority, just ask, they will give us. Information have not been forthcoming. So therefore, we wanted to make it public. And what's wrong with making it public? I think every Bahamian would support that idea. What the government have to hide?
Thank you so much. That was the chairman of the Public Accounts Committee, the MP for St. Anne's, Hubert Chipman. Of course, debate on those compendium of bills that impact the credit union sector in the country will continue to be debated when the House of Assembly resumes at the 3 o'clock hour. Thanks so much for joining us. Once again, I'm Janae Noel Ferguson. Back to you in the studio, Julian.
Yes, and thank you, Janaea, for those interviews. And as she said, we will see you all back here at 3 p.m. Tune in.